I stayed up all night to memorize a speech on vegetarianism. And so I was becoming like an advocate, through speaking. And I felt like vegetarianism was the most, ethical way to live, and also healthy and good for the planet and so forth.
Hello and welcome. We are in another episode of the Veganpreneur Revolution Podcast. And I'm VLynn Hawkins, one of your co-hosts, along with my co-host,
Kathleen Gage. Good to be here.
And we are co-founders of the Vegan Visibility Productions, full-service digital marketing firm. And we have the awesome opportunity sometimes to come across some amazing people. And when I say amazing people, they're out there in the world. They are doing such an amazing job in the work that they do, the life that they live, the service that they provide. And today is no exception. We have Priya Acharya with us today. And Priya is a documentary producer. And I love that because she's in the middle of a couple of projects that when I looked at them, they held dear to my heart. And as we talk about the projects, as we talk about her journey, I want you to think about your contribution to this world of healthier living, whole food, plant-based education. Whether you are seeking education, you're providing education, we all have a part to play in this movement. And Priya is doing her part in a very big way. So I won't take any more time, and I would love to welcome Priya. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I could have read you all of Priya's credentials, a master's in this, this and that. And, the thing that struck me the most was just her conversation around her journey and the projects that she's working on right now. And so I'm going to just start off with the first question, Kathleen, and ask Priya to get us started on this life of Priya. You were born in India, you were raised in the US, you went back to India. Tell us, and in between all of that life and school and family, and tell us that journey in a nutshell, if that's possible.
Sure, absolutely. So I immigrated to the US as a 7-year-old. I'm the fourth kid. And my dad had come here first. He got his master's at Northeastern and raised enough money to bring his wife and 4 kids over in 1975, October of 1975. And so then we kind of moved around every 2 years. I believe he had 2-year engineering contracts. And I was raised vegetarian, Brahmin Hindu. I believe that was part of our ancestral culture, is that we've all been vegetarian. I think that's part of being Brahmin. And so that was the norm for us. So I grew up, primarily eating vegetarian Indian food. And then as I became a teenager, growing up here in the States, I wanted to evaluate, is this how I want to proceed? Does this make sense to me to be a vegetarian? And I did some research and I felt like, wow, I think this is the right choice. And it made sense to me at various levels. And I thought, I want to continue being vegetarian. I think I'm, living in the best way. And I was on the debate team at my high school in North Carolina, in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was in original oratory. And so I ended up in a tournament, and I stayed up all night to memorize a speech on vegetarianism. And So I was becoming like an advocate, through speaking. And I felt like vegetarianism was the most, ethical way to live, and also healthy and good for the planet and so forth. And, at that time, I really didn't see anything, and this was in the 80s, early 80s, that around like harm with dairy. So really felt like I'm doing the right thing. I'm living the best way possible, most ethical way. And so, I gave the speech and included information on like what's in a hot dog and so forth. And the judges would say after, like, even if I didn't win the tournament, they're like, I'm thinking about being a vegetarian, So I became kind of an influencer through these tournaments. And I was quarterfinalist in North Carolina. And I was interviewed by the Vegetarian Society around teenagers who are vegetarian. So this was, my history. I was like a, staunch vegetarian. And going into adulthood, I think it was more, even in the last 10 to 15 years, maybe even 20, that I came across like a vegan. And so it was a little bit of a curiosity. But in the back of my mind, I kind of thought, well, it seems like there's some issue with factory farming, and I'll have to look into that. But I think, I'm from India, so it's a little different back home, I'm sure, in terms of how cows are treated than here in the US. So I kind of, had that thought in the back of my mind, but just proceeded to live my vegetarian life, and included like, having yogurt, plain yogurt, with all my Indian food and so forth. So, I started to notice some vegan friends. And again, there was that kind of thinking like I'm in some kind of an exceptional crowd, as an Indian. Like, what if I go to the Indian store, for instance, and get the dairy items there? They're from cows who must be treated better from India. So there were all these kind of weird justifications, and kind of on the fence a little bit and sort of curious. And then I'd say within the last 15 years, I would want to start the new year by sort of doing a cleanse, and it would normally be vegan, and I thought, I think I could continue this, but it wasn't something I experienced support from in my former marriage to an omnivore, because he would say, well, it's already a vegetarian home, I can't have, more restriction. So I would end up kind of moving away from that, and, have raised 2 kids, tried to raise them vegetarian. And I ended up getting divorced in 2017. And at that time, I watched What the Health. But there was also this sense that, I had been experiencing sort of growing, I don't know, almost degradation about my interest in veganism, that it was this inconvenience to him to not have meat readily available, and it wasn't enough that he could grill fish, on the deck and going out to eat and all. So some of that had, I think become a source of disconnect. And so when I divorced, there was this sense of freedom around, well, I can live how I want now, and I can explore veganism. And I think watching What the Health prompted me more in that direction. And I started to transition. But there was still, I think, probably thinking it must be different in India, So I had started to become more interested in mindfulness. And part of that was like going through recovery with my divorce, and just feeling like mindfulness had become an important part of my life that I had become more and more curious about and wanting to study it. And I'd been coaching and wanting to offer it in coaching. And so I ended up joining a certification program by 2020. Within that program, there was a precept called to do no harm. And, the part of me that was vegan just kind of naturally aligned with that. Like, well, of course, yeah, like I'm already living in a way where there isn't any harm in terms of my diet. But then I started to hear responses from my 2,500 global classmates around sort of circumventing the idea, like, what if you just kind of approach it a little bit, you just do your best, and there's humane slaughter. And there were all these stories people were sharing around their sacred hunting journeys, and the ancestral, sacredness around hunting and killing animals. And if it's done humanely and you eat all, there's so many stories. And I was just getting completely, bug-eyed and like, what is happening? And it just kind of prompted sort of a spiritual crisis for me. Like, oh my God, like I'm having a hard time listening to these different stories, but then also like, am I judgmental? Am I not compassionate enough to my classmates? And so it was a kind of a crisis for me. And I, approached my teachers about it. And I experienced like vegan microaggression with my mentor when we talked about the precept, and he sort of sounded dismissive about it. And when I shared, like, my whole ancestry, we've never eaten meat, and I've never talked about that, never introduced myself that way, because there was no context to do that. But it was kind of the first time I was like, yeah, this is part of my heritage. And I learned through my program that even mindfulness started with my ancestry, with the Brahmins. They would use mindfulness to study the Vedas and the texts, to memorize it. So there was this whole connection, greater connection around what is even mindfulness, for me, and this connection to my heritage. But then to start thinking about my heritage, like what is this fascination with dairy? What did my ancestors do around dairy? How were the cows treated? How were the calves treated? And I needed to have sort of this internal peace, just for myself. Like, I need to understand, because I want to be a mindfulness teacher with integrity. I want everything to make sense for me and my heritage and who I am. And so I, started to explore, and I was, asking my relatives in Pakistan and India, like, what did we do with the calves, and how did all that, how did this work? And there was just a lot of vagueness, and I really didn't, get a straight answer or any kind of shared curiosity. Like, I understand your, anguish, and there was none of that. And so, yeah, I continued in the program. I asked another teacher who was not vegan about that precept, and he shared that, well, you're getting to be kind of an activist by bringing this up. And so as if that's adequate, because it was a live presentation that all my classmates could view. But he said, well, if we kind of basically required the standard that you all need to be vegan, then people would drop out, So basically it just seemed like it was about a loss of potential tuition, is how it sounded, like an economic issue, and is the impression I got. So I felt, rather disgruntled about that, like, how is this, being a mindfulness teacher? How can you be a non-vegan mindfulness teacher? Because it seemed like a contradiction. Because part of what we studied is that compassion is very interwoven with mindfulness. And how do you how do you be a compassionate, not just a compassionate person, but a teacher of compassion while eating animals, right? And how do you do mindful eating while eating animals? So there are all these questions, kind of contradictions I was experiencing with my program. And then it sort of became, I think, expanded from that, like going to retreats to realize, well, I'm the only vegan here, at a mindfulness retreat. And so it's not just my program, it's the whole like mindfulness community, the whole kind of wellness world here, around mindfulness and this sort of distortion of the idea of do no harm, and within Buddhism as well. I've gone to lectures by a Buddhist scholar who talked about compassion for all beings, but then his assistant told me, well, he eats meat to be athletic, like all the monks in Tibet, it's kind of common. And so I'm like, well, what does that mean? Compassion for all beings, but then you're eating animals, like, you're not walking the talk, right? So I just started to realize, like, it's not just my program. It's not just a problem with this specific program. It's the mindfulness community. And it's not like there is some kind of global standards committee, right, for mindfulness, like to be a teacher, you must, be vegan and so forth. So it seemed very kind of loosey-goosey. You could just kind of do whatever and do, the precept to do no harm means kind of a lot of stuff. Right. Apparently includes to eat animals, and similarly with ahimsa, right? It's, do no harm is kind of the same thing as ahimsa. And, also expanding it to like yoga, for instance. There were a lot of yoga teachers in my program, and I'd go to yoga retreats and find that the yoga teachers were not vegan, And it's like, well, part of yoga is not just, the asanas, the poses. It's about a lifestyle. It's about, having the foundation of ahimsa. And so that was a contradiction too. It's like, how can you be a teacher of yoga, but basically dismiss ahimsa, right?
That's fascinating. And it's interesting because with what you're saying, I didn't realize that to the extent that you're sharing that. And when I worked within the pet industry as a consultant, I would go to conferences and I was a keynote speaker and I consulted on how to fill their events. And I have to tell you, I was shocked. The first pet industry conference I went to, where they were serving filet mignon, they were serving chicken and salmon. And I was like, and that's before I became vegan. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. It's like, I don't get this. And I was actually at one huge conference, the only person who asked for vegan meals. I said plant-based because at the time I identified more as plant-based than vegan. And I said, would it be possible to get meals without any animal products, no dairy, just, if I could get that, and I put it in the contract. Well, they decided to try half the buffet with plant-based choices and the other half with their regular. The side with the plant-based went faster than anything else. And several vegans came to the meeting planner and said, thank you. We've been waiting for this. They had never considered that they had vegans within their membership. So, that's fascinating, Priya. Now, when did you really cross the line and say, okay, I am vegan? And then that moved you into doing your documentary on the milk industry.
Right. So I was at a retreat in Costa Rica the summer of 2020, 2 years ago. And that's partly where, I was starting to realize that this kind of issue I've been having is kind of broader. Here I am, in a different country at a retreat, and I'm the only vegan. And I saw like chicken coop there. And so it was just like, wow, swimming with contradictions here. They were refusing me tofu, which they were rationing, but, the eggs were readily available. And, there was a yoga teacher there from France who said she loves cheese. And so it was kind of around that time that I was just starting to realize, like, I need to do something, that it's not just about graduating and, having the shift that's gone from a tool to add to my coaching to being activated about veganism, that I needed to do something. And so that became part of, I think, my transformation from being a vegan to being an advocate. And I had studied some film and appreciated documentaries. And so I thought, I want to explore making a documentary. And I shared about my interest with a friend who had been working with a video editor. And then by that fall, I got started with working on the documentary. And then I was heading to India by December. And so not only was I thinking, well, here's this video editor who's going to help me kind of handle all the technicalities with the video. But when he realized I'm going to India, he, was like going into technical film school and becoming a camera person. So he's like, we got to get you trained and so you can get footage. And so I got the cameras he suggested. I was training and, did all this homework leading up, just a crash course on making sure that I was going to be able to get good footage from India. And so I was in India for 3 weeks. I went to various cattle farms and tried to get a sense of the reality of what was happening. And so that's what I want to share because it's storytelling. It's about my story. It's not about lecturing. Here's a data dump on how terrible it is. This is my journey. And you can't get defensive about that. It's just my story. And maybe there's something that resonates for people. I feel like it's a very sensitive topic, right? And so I feel like hopefully by trying to make it about my story, my journey, that it would keep the defenses down and kind of a backdoor.
Right.
With trying to get some awareness out.
Well, the trailer is incredible, and if that's your first documentary, kudos to you. I mean, I thought you'd been doing documentaries for quite some time, and I showed it to VLynn, and we're just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And it's got such an important message, and I love how it starts kind of retro, and then you have the screeching where everything comes to a stop, and then it goes into a whole different set of circumstances. So with your documentary, I've got a few questions, and then I know VLynn's got a boatload of questions. She always does. She takes lots of notes, and she's such a great note taker. And then she asks these questions that you're going, okay, she was listening 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. What do you hope that the video or the documentary is going to accomplish?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that with awareness, for one, those where there are people where just having, for instance, the awareness, like calves are dying for, this glass of milk, like that might be enough for some people, like when I was on my vegetarian kick thinking I'm doing everything, great.
Right.
There was not a single thought about calves, there was no connection around the basics, right? Cows have to get pregnant. There are calves. What happens to them? That whole story, I was completely clueless about. And so part of my thought is that so are a lot of other vegetarians,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's now that I look back, it's like, how did I not?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm realizing I don't think I'm the only one.
No, I think we all go through that part of the journey.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that maybe for some, because I know if I was someone who saw that trailer, if got just even that information, that would have been enough for me to go, okay, I'm not having dairy. So I'm hoping there will be those people where that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, have the conversation around, ethics, morality, just to kind of get people thinking. And I feel like by just picking on the mindfulness community, you know, it's kind of indirect. I'm just picking that kind of like this layer, right, of society, the standard. But I think it's deliberate and purposeful, because I think it's easier to pick on that than like my next door neighbor, or, you know, my predominantly non-vegan neighbors.
Right.
In Colorado, you know, that it's not to get them defensive, but it's like, hopefully it's like going to be like a trickling down kind of message, right?
Right.
It's like to talk about a standard of just wanting to uphold the standard to do no harm of ahimsa for the mindfulness community. You know, hopefully that seems a little reasonable, but hopefully it would begin the thought process that if it's kind of reasonable for them, like, is it reasonable for you? You know, like to just kind of start that, hopefully that trickle down thinking, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, VLynn, what are the questions that you have?
This has just been really deep. And I want to just tag off of something you just said about people relating to the just the whole mantra of do no harm. And it made me think about the correlation of that to the golden rule. You know, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Well, you would hope that that would not be harm, right? And I think that this is a new way to relate to that. That maybe that needs to be expanded as the kind of trailer reminder, do no harm. You know, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you, do no harm. And really bring that message back, because I remember growing up, that was something that I, as a kid, heard a lot. That was a message that made me know that bullying was not right. You know, that was something that I could imagine that other kids who were bullies did not learn. This whole thing around do no harm takes a lot into account. But I think too that when we see it for ourselves first and how it relates to self first, then we easily, it's like our eyes are open to see what's happening to others. You know, I remember my journey in the plant-based space began with, you know, learning from these luminaries about the health benefits, and very little came up about the animal agriculture. The environmental piece came up, but the animal cruelty piece was, I want to say, downplayed a little bit. And I think it was because it's such a hard target that, you know, health, you kind of can glide through that kind of conversation. Environment, you know, we still see grass, so maybe it's not as bad as we think. But the animals, when we think about them, out of sight, out of mind, and it's the compassion element. So let me ask you, with your really getting this message of compassion to the world, how do you anticipate, and do you anticipate getting this in front of our young adults, our youth? Because we know that they are going to inherit everything that we are moving out of. And until this really comes in and touches them in a learning capacity, we're still missing the mark. And that's something that both Kathleen and I are very adamant about, is bringing this work into opening this work for our youth. And so what, do you have anything so far that you're doing that actually puts this message in front of the youth, even, you know, the young adults, college students, or, you know, those coming out of high school? And I'll get into a little more of that. It's the reason that I'm actually asking, because What I saw was hard. It's that hard middle piece, but it wasn't too hard. You know what I mean? And I really appreciate you for that. It was devastating to see you walking, for me, to see you walking down the streets in India, and these cows are like right there, but they're digging in the garbage. And, you know, we've all seen our neighborhoods and the neighborhoods we go through, and the people, you know, on television, we see the people doing this. How do you bring this message for young people to consume?
So, you know, it was considered in even the structure of the project, because initially the thought was to make it webisodes. So basically like 5-minute pieces and put together, you know, like there would be 6 of them. And so it would be basically 30 minutes. And then we decided, like, instead of like doing them in separate fragments, that it would be a short film essentially that would be more marketable, but it would still be, you could still section it off to create, like, you know, 5-minute segments later to be able to more easily share on social media. And so, you know, we all know everybody has low attention span these days, but especially the young people, you know, not asking to watch a feature film, you know, or even something 30 minutes. So once it is complete, then we should be able to break it up and have 5-minute clips on different topics. So they were very much considered in terms of this message. And the thought is that this is the start of kind of the journey. So want to do this project as sort of laying a foundation of my story, and kind of the problem, you know, getting that sort of out of the way and addressed, but then to move towards more of the solution. So the hope is that, you know, with enough support, that we can create a feature film that would be more in depth, that would address more of kind of the solution and who knows, maybe beyond that, there could be a future beyond that with having a series or something that is just focusing on the solution. And, you know, maybe that's just profiling successful vegan businesses.
Right.
That could be all very appealing, I think, to the younger population that is just trying to make veganism sort of a fun party, you know,
Right.
like this is a cool happening trend, you know, get on this train. And so that's kind of where I'd want to head, that I think would be more appealing for the younger population, that kind of raise that whole coolness factor. You know, the food is cool, the people are cool, everything's cool, join this party, right?
Right.
But we got to lay kind of the initial groundwork with the issues with, and that's what I think Do No Harm is, but I see it as kind of the beginning.
So I'm curious how you plan to market it. Like, what is the plan to get the message out there? Because I actually have a very dear friend who just had her book published by Simon & Schuster, and one of the things she did is started a crowdfunding about 6 months ago to give her the seed money to go to spiritual centers and Unity churches to do book signings and talks. And so she made a few $1,000s to get her on her way, and then she's going to sell books at these locations. And it was like, oh, that's brilliant. So I'm kind of curious what your plan is.
If I could just tag on to that, I know
Absolutely.
that Priya, you have a crowdfunding campaign, and you've raised nearly $13,000
Nice.
for the post-production efforts that you have in mind. But Kathleen's point is very well taken, because once you've got the film, and we do this in our coaching, and we always have a what's next. And I'm sure you've thought about that, but that's a great question. I'm also curious about that. And I want to just say too, that I really appreciated the clarity and the simplicity of your campaign, with the number of donors and the amount of money that you've raised. This is something that you are reaching the right people for you to have raised this kind of money. And you're well on your way to accomplishing the post-production editing. And, I don't know if you plan to get it into film festivals, and if so, what's the time frame? I mean, we could go on with a few questions there.
I'm already seeing her at the Academy Awards going, it's an independent film and it's all about veganism and save the cow. No, seriously, I was kind of getting this download of like, oh, this is perfect for that.
Yeah, so the hope is to get additional support to complete post-production. We're hoping to have, the best level of editing possible that we can have. Maybe, try to include more high-profile interviews. Maybe go back to India to do more of those. So there are potential areas that could use more support. And I was laid off from my corporate job last fall. So I'm, single mom, kind of trying to financially handle all this. And so I'm actually also writing a book that is related that, would be a little more in depth than this short film. And so I hope to be able to sell that at film festivals. And of course, the film festivals themselves have fees. So could use, more support. My video editor was talking to a production company that may participate. We've created a coffee table book this past spring that is kind of like a pitch deck, that's got really a lot of the imagery from the short film along with text. But, it was over $60 just to print that. So it's not something that I would be trying to sell, that it's just more like something to give potential investors or to show people what this is about. And then, of course, if we were to do the feature film, getting to that level, like that would be a lot more financial investment. So trying to at least just like get the short film done, kind of get the ball rolling, get this book finished that I could, potentially sell at the film festivals. Nice. So trying to do that. It makes sense to kind of do the book first, have that ready to go, so that once the short film is complete, they can get paired together. So that's kind of the plan for now. So I'm focusing more on the book, and then to continue on with the short film. Going to conference with the Humane Society in a couple of weeks, taking action for animals. So I'm going to take my coffee table book with me, hopefully be able to share it then.
It's interesting because you just mentioned the Humane Society, and in our area, there's a lot of animal rescue that goes on. But I have to tell you, I have been shocked that people go out and rescue a bunch of goats or a bunch of horses or a bunch of dogs or cats. Then they have barbecues later. I'm serious. And it's like sponsored by the Humane Society. And I'm just like, okay, that's the whole thing with the pet industry too. And the ahimsa and the mindfulness. It's like, there's so much work to be done. And I should have known you knew all this stuff because you're an MBA in marketing. So it's like, duh. But you said something that I want to kind of spin back to. How could I have not known? You when you finally got that aha moment, it was like, how could I have not known? I was 64 when I went vegan, and that was 6 years ago. And it was just like, I look back now, and I mean, I've been rescuing animals for quite some time, and we have a small self-funded sanctuary in our land here. And I look at that, and it was like, I had to go through forgiveness of myself. Mm-hmm. And did you experience that with when you finally got the big aha of like, wow, it's all connected?
Yeah.
Did you go through that?
Yeah, there is, tremendous grief around like, why did it take me so long? Yeah. Around all the dairy and like kind of all the sort of, excuses around, oh, I'm Indian. And there must be like, why didn't I pause to kind of like, let me look into this, and because when I finally kind of had this conversation with a friend who was sort of gently telling me how like, Priya, the cows have to get pregnant. And that, I felt like I'm in kindergarten, like someone's having to explain to me, this kind of very basic thing. Well, like, duh, of course, like they're mammals. They have to get pregnant. And then, and I was trying to explain, like, yeah, in India, we grow up with all this imagery, with the religious imagery around Krishna, he's stealing dairy. There's kind of all that component too.
Right.
It's like, this is like what it means to be almost like Indian. It's like part of our identity is that we have the dairy, because Krishna had it. Like, it's all this mythology. But yeah, a lot of grief around how did I not think about this further, and after that conversation with a friend, it was like not that complicated to Google around what's happening in India, and I learned how even though it's illegal in some states, like the cows get stolen and taken to other states where slaughtering them is allowed. The buffaloes are allowed to be slaughtered legally, slaughtered, I learned. But then as you see in the trailer, that was my first visit to a cattle farm, is seeing a dead calf, at the exit. And, and then, I talked to the owner later, and she kind of confirmed with me that, this is kind of their process, that, at kind of the standard cattle farm, the calves are, smuggled away, slaughtered. And
that was heartbreaking for me to see the mother cow just running after the wheelbarrow that the baby was being carted away in. And I mean, I could only imagine her sorrow and crying that she was doing, where are you taking my child? And, there's some mothers, and, you could imagine that if the cow could have stood up on two legs and used the other two, she'd have been fighting to get her child back. And it's something that until it comes into your awareness, it's totally outside of your awareness. And what can we do besides supporting people like you, supporting your efforts, contributing to the crowdfunding campaign? What are some words that you could give us to be able to repeat, to help someone to get a little more curious?
Yeah, I think, it really starts with connection, it's like the secret sauce, right? All vegans are wanting to know, how do we, talk to the non-vegans? And I don't think that a lot of non-vegans are open to just like a data dump, like some information. And I think it really helps having the connection. Like, I mentioned the conversation I had with a vegan friend who said, hey, let me, talk to you about like what happens with the, because there was this trust and just feeling like, okay, this person cares about me. So I wasn't being defensive, so I think it probably helps, right? If we have a relative or a close friend where, maybe health is important to them. So maybe that could be the focus. Like, hey, I really care about your health. And, I noticed that you're consuming this. Are you aware, like, that, dairy is not really that healthy? There's issues around various, health disorders, and to be able to easily share like videos from nutritionfacts.org, and I think that that's a different context, right? It's just like, hey, you're just someone who's trying to take care of their health, for instance. The point with do no harm is, it's the ethics angle. And so it's been kind of proven that that's the door that most people do not come out of. Like, you hear a lot of, you hear people who are no longer vegan. And sometimes if it's based on health, some former vegans will say, well, like, oh, I think, I need it for my health. Or I think the environment may not be as compelling. But I think if someone really get the ethical angle, if
you are correct.
That's the harder.
You are correct.
Harder door to exit from. than the others. And so that's kind of sort of, I guess, the business end of, the storytelling.
Right.
Is like we're trying to sell the ethics end, because those are the trying to create vegans through the ethical door, and they're the ones who will be long-term vegans. And so that's kind of the business sell, right? We're creating the vegan customers for all the vegan products, and
Right.
it's the most sustainable long-term creation of a vegan customer.
There's so much to unwrap with all this, because I think of the times that I invited people to watch videos, and they, who are animal lovers, and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to watch that. No, I can't watch that." And it's like, okay. And so it's like each situation is unique. And I think approaching it from a place for ourselves of compassion. And years ago, this was probably about a year into being plant-based. And then I had crossed into identifying as a vegan. I mean, I had a visceral response to looking at the meat department at the store. And it was like, I can't do this. And then I started really digging deep, and I realized that was when I had to go through the forgiveness process. But I went to a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society. And I used to sit on the council when I lived in Salt Lake City for the American Cancer Society. And we would work with lobbyists and the politicians and all this. And it was just a bunch of red tape. So it was for some foot race. And I thought, okay, I'll go. Well, what shocked me was they were serving donuts, they were serving chocolate milk, they were serving candy, they were just junk. And so first I had to just calm down, because I thought, okay, this is not about me. Let's, approach it from a compassionate perspective. And I went to the person who put on the event, and I said, "Can I share something with you?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, sure." And I said, "I'd like to give you some feedback on the food that you're serving. That food causes cancer. And to be serving it at a cancer event just seems a little odd." And I said, "I hope I haven't overstepped, but I really wanted to share that with you." And she said, "You're the fourth person who's approached me tonight." And so the fact that people were willing to speak up, I think that's where we can make a difference. But, it's so interesting, because like with documentaries like yours, I think just the way you started it was so powerful, and it was so different than what we see in a lot of the videos. So, and a lot of the documentaries. So I really applaud you in the approach that you took, and just, looking at those memories from childhood, because I grew up in the 50s, and it's like, wow, those are all very fresh memories. So I congratulate you on that.
Thank you. Yeah. So, trying to address my history with the US, having been brought up here and then being from India, with storytelling, to be addressed kind of, the issue in both countries, with being such huge dairy producers. And to do it as like, these are two countries that are, they're part of my life.
Right.
And so that was the intent there, with showing the commercials with like that. This is the part of the history of growing up in the US and then going back home. So that was the hope, is that to try to create some kind of an emotional connection.
You did. You accomplished that. You definitely did.
Like, this is, we all grew up with this lie, right? With the commercials. So to not be blaming, but like trying to open up, right? Like all of us trying to, let's wake up,
Right.
An invitation.
We don't get lied to anymore. No. Yeah. Big pharma, healthcare, the food industry. I mean, it's like there's so much to unravel here. But I first of all, I want to remind people that you're listening to the Veganpreneur Revolution podcast show, and wherever you're listening, you're watching, please go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a review, because that helps with the algorithms, and we get our message out to more people. And we have to get Priya's message out there too. It's a must. It's a must. So.
Yes. Priya, I can only wait, darn it, for the full production. But the trailer is amazing. And I want to ask our audience, find it. The name of it is Do No Harm.
It'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes. make a donation, make a commitment to even $10 to be a part of something that can have a profound impact and help in this major momentous movement that we've got going on now. Because we all know that, when you're the giant milk industry and us little peanuts over here are trying to make our way through, it's going to take a lot of little peanuts. And we want you to be a part of this collective with us as we're moving through this space to make a difference. And, I have to say, too, that I love what you're doing, Priya, and you have not once said that this is for me. There are a lot of things that a lot of people are doing. I'm writing my legacy book. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and it's for me. But you have not once said that. So we get the message that this is for those who are in need, who are searching, who know that, sooner or later, they're going to come around, because sooner or later, this is going to be I think we're at a critical mass now. It's going to be at so much greater critical mass that you cannot help but see these things. And yours, while showing truth without hiding anything, it's a little easier to see than some of the other documentaries that I've seen that really had me doing this, because it was just horrendous to look at. And I've even said I can't watch anymore to some of the documentaries that have been put in front of me, that I've put in front of myself. But when we look at the things that are out here and we want people to step up, and how do you say it's okay? We're meeting people where they are, and if it's not the right time for them now, how do we say it's okay?
Yeah, I love that idea of meeting people where they're at. And I think this is something, I see, I guess, various levels where vegans are at with that, activists are at. There are activists who, for instance, don't want to support maybe establishments that sell both vegan, non-vegan. And I think we have to kind of applaud any movement towards veganism, because change only happens with encouragement versus shaming. If we just think back to ourselves, what if we wanted to change through shame, right? If we were put down or belittled. So I think we have to applaud any attempts to have vegan. For instance, I believe Delta has oat creamer. So any of these changes, I think we have to celebrate. And because the more that we encourage these even small movements towards plant-based, then it will be just a snowball effect to result in more and more of that, right? And so that is my future intent, beyond do no harm, is to kind of have projects that are about celebrating, potential changes like that with businesses. And the numbers are that, for instance, reducitarians, have more impact on saving animals than just the few 1% of vegans.
Reducitarians?
Yeah, so people who reduce their intake, for instance.
Oh, okay.
So, there was a reducitarian summit here in Denver last fall.
Wow.
And so
I just learned something new.
Yeah, me too.
So there are some people who might have a problem with that concept, right? But it's just kind of about numbers. It's like, right? If you have more people who just reduce their meat intake, then it equals more animals saved.
Right.
Yes, and
Right.
celebrating
Good
that.
point.
Yeah. So I would so the question about like what to say to people, like I think, if you have a neighbor or friend who appreciates something that's plant-based, like pat them on the back and encourage them and share your plant-based food and kind of show them the way, and promote your vegan food. Like I promoted on Facebook, vegan food, just to kind of show this is not some kind of strange food. It looks, good, it's tasty. So I think the more that we support and encourage others, by making more and more plant-based choices, like that's going to result in less harm to the individuals and less animals killed overall. So I think that's the way we want to be, rather than purist, right? We don't want to change them. Yeah, like, well, you had plant-based meatless Monday, but then Tuesday you ate, like we don't want to shame them. We want to applaud them for their meatless Monday and for the efforts they're making. I think the more encouragement they have, the better they're going to feel about themselves and towards vegans, to see them as positive, supportive people versus haters.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have to say, this has been delightful. This has been an eye opener, and I've learned a new term, reductionist. I knew nothing about that.
Reducitarians.
Reducitarians. Okay. I'm going to have to look that up and do some research on that. That's phenomenal. And Priya, this has been delightful, and we wish you all the success with your documentary so that you can continue getting the message out and educating people as to the kindest way to live and the most compassionate, which is do no harm to yourself, to the animals, to the environment, to one another, and, make the world a kinder place through what you put on the end of your fork. So, VLynn, what are your closing thoughts?
Thank you, Priya, for doing what you do, for moving it in such a way that you have garnered such great support already. We hope that this opportunity will bring even more, and everything that you do going forward yields even more to help get this message out. So we're supporters and would love to do whatever we can, and starts right here on the Veganpreneur Revolution podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Veganpreneur Revolution podcast show with VLynn, Hawkins, and Kathleen Gage. Be sure to leave a review, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to this channel. And visit our website at veganvisibilityproductions.com. That's veganvisibilityproductions.com. Have a great day and live healthy.